He sold his father's watch for $23 to pay for his daughter's insulin. The woman who bought it showed up at his door 8 weeks later, and she wasn't alone. Gideon Marsh had not slept in 3 days. Not the kind of not sleeping where you drift in and out and wake up feeling like you almost got there. The real kind. The kind where you lie on your back in the dark and stare at the ceiling, and your brain just runs and runs and runs like an engine that can't find a way to shut off. The watch was on the nightstand beside him. He kept picking it up and putting it back down. It was a Bulova, gold-toned, not real gold, with a brown leather strap that had cracked along the inside of the band from years of wear. His father had worn it every day for 31 years. To work at the shipyard, to church on Sundays, to every one of Gideon's baseball games when Gideon was growing up in Galveston, Texas. When Raymond Marsh died of a stroke at 67, that watch was still on his wrist. The hospital nurse had placed it in a small plastic bag with the rest of his belongings and handed it to Gideon in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and quiet grief. Gideon had worn it himself for 11 years after that, every single day. To his own job at the lumber yard, to his daughter's school plays, to the courthouse the morning his divorce was finalized. The watch had been there for all of it. The good days and the days he'd rather forget. Now it was sitting on the nightstand, and tomorrow morning he was going to take it to a place on Market Street that had bars on the windows and a sign that read, "We buy gold, silver, watch, jewelry. Best prices in town." He already knew it wasn't worth much. A Bulova from the early 90s with a cracked band and a scratch across the crystal. Maybe $30 if he was lucky, maybe $20 if he wasn't. His daughter Penny needed her insulin. That was the whole math of it, right there. Penelope Marsh was 14 years old. She had her mother's green eyes and her grandfather's stubborn chin and type 1 diabetes that had been diagnosed when she was 9. She needed insulin to live, not metaphorically, literally. Without it, her body would begin to shut itself down within days. Gideon knew this the way he knew how to breathe. It was just a fact of his life, the same way some people's lives included mortgages or car payments or college funds. His life included vials of insulin, lancets, test strips, and a continuous glucose monitor that cost more than his truck payment. Insurance had covered most of it when he was working full-time at Galveston County Public Works. Driving a maintenance truck, keeping the city's infrastructure from falling apart. Then, 8 months ago, a structural failure on the Harborview Bridge project led to a budget review that led to layoffs, and Gideon's name was on the list. He had 19 years with the county. He was 2 years from his pension, vesting fully. And just like that, the job was gone. COBRA coverage lasted 3 months. After that, he applied for Medicaid. He filled out the forms, submitted the paperwork, waited. The first application was denied on a technicality. He had listed his address wrong by 1 digit. He reapplied. He waited again. The second application was still pending. In the meantime, Penny still needed her insulin. A 1-month supply without insurance. $340. Gideon had $317 in his checking account. He had $11 in his wallet. He had a truck with 210,000 miles on it, a 2-bedroom rental house on the east side of Galveston, and a watch on his nightstand that used to belong to his father. He picked it up one more time in the dark. He turned it over. On the back, his grandmother had paid to have something engraved when she gave it to his father on their 25th wedding anniversary. The letters were small and worn, but still legible. To R. Time is our only gift. Use it well. He set it back down. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said quietly to the ceiling. "I'll make it right somehow." He didn't sleep. The shop on Market Street opened at 9. Gideon was there at 8:53, sitting in his truck in the parking lot, the watch in his shirt pocket. He watched a woman with a stroller walk past. A man in a postal uniform crossed the street. A pigeon landed on the awning above the shop door and then flew away. At 9 o'clock, the lights inside the shop flicked on. The man behind the counter was heavyset, in his 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He barely looked at Gideon when he walked in, just held out his hand like he'd seen 1,000 people walk through that door with something they didn't want to sell but had to. Gideon set the watch on the glass counter. The man picked it up, turned it over, looked at the crystal, looked at the band, held it up to the light. "Gold-toned," he said, "not real gold." Bands cracked, crystals scratched. He set it down. $23, $23. 31 years on his father's wrist, 11 years on his. The Galveston shipyard. Sunday church services, every baseball game, a hospital hallway in a plastic bag. $23. Gideon looked at the watch on the glass counter. He looked at the engraving on the back, those words his grandmother had chosen. He thought about Penny. He thought about what happened if he walked out of here without that money. "Okay," he said. The man opened the register and counted out bills, a 20 and 3 ones. He laid them flat on the counter. Gideon picked them up. He folded them once and put them in his front pocket. He did not look at the watch again. He walked to the door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the morning air. The sun was already bright over Galveston. It was going to be a hot day. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, his hands in his pockets, and breathed in slowly through his nose. He didn't cry. He was 51 years old, and he had learned a long time ago that crying didn't change the math. He drove straight to the pharmacy. Inside the shop, the man behind the counter slid the watch into a tray beneath the glass case. He labeled it with a small price tag, $65. A woman had been standing near the back of the store, looking at a display of old cameras. She was in her mid-40s, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the kind of posture that suggested she was used to paying close attention to things. She had been there when Gideon walked in. She had watched the whole exchange. She had seen the way his hand rested on the watch for just a second, too long before he pulled it back. She had seen him look at the engraving. She had seen the way he folded those 3 bills and put them in his pocket like he was putting something away he didn't want to think about anymore. She walked to the counter. "That watch," she said, "the one you just bought." The man reached under the glass and set it on the counter. She picked it up, turned it over, read the engraving. She stood there for a long moment. Then she set it back on the counter and said, "I'll take it." "65, the man said. She paid without negotiating and put the watch carefully in the side pocket of her bag. Then she walked to the door and stepped outside. The man who had sold it was long gone. She stood on the sidewalk looking up and down Market Street. She didn't know his name. She didn't know where he lived or why he'd needed the money. She only knew what she had seen, and what she had seen had done something to her chest that she couldn't quite explain. She walked to her car. She put the watch on the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel for a moment looking at it. Then she drove to work. She would carry that watch in her bag every day for the next 56 days before she finally figured out what to do. But first, you need to understand who she is. And to understand who she is, you need to go back about 15 years. Her name was Josephine Lattimore. She went by Jo, except at work, where she was Dr. Lattimore, and in that context, the full name mattered. She was a family physician at a small clinic on Broadway Avenue in Galveston called Gulf Coast Community Health. It was not a glamorous clinic. It didn't have a rooftop lounge or a concierge service. It had plastic chairs in the waiting room, a fish tank with 2 fish, and a receptionist named Carol who had been answering the phones there for 18 years. Jo had been practicing there for 11. She had grown up in Houston, the daughter of a woman who cleaned houses and a man who drove a delivery truck. She had gotten through college on grants and loans and sheer stubbornness, then through medical school the same way. She had $190,000 in student loan debt, and a clinic that served mostly uninsured and underinsured patients in a coastal county, where the median household income sat well below the state average. She did not drive a luxury car. She did not live in a large house. She lived in a 2-bedroom bungalow near the seawall, with a cat named George and a front porch where she drank her coffee every morning and watched the pelicans fly over. She was not rich, but she had something that money couldn't buy and couldn't replace. And she knew it. She knew what was available. She knew the programs, the funds, the applications, the numbers to call. She spent half her time not just treating patients, but connecting them to resources they didn't know existed. Because in her experience, the gap between someone drowning and someone making it was almost never about effort. It was almost always about information. She had seen it 1,000 times. A patient sitting in front of her who had been rationing their medication for months, cutting pills in half, skipping doses, doing the desperate arithmetic of survival, and all they needed was someone to tell them about the program that could help. The form that needed to be filled out, the number that needed to be called. She thought about the man in the pawn shop every day for 8 weeks. She didn't know why she couldn't let it go. She bought things at estate sales and thrift stores all the time. She had a weakness for old cameras and vintage jewelry and objects with obvious histories. She had never felt compelled to track down the people who sold them before. But this was different. Something about the way he'd said, "Okay." Just that one word, flat and quiet and exhausted. Like someone who had been saying okay to terrible things for so long that the word had lost its meaning. She started going back to the pawn shop on Market Street every few weeks, asking the man behind the counter if he remembered the customer. He remembered him. He didn't know his name. She tried to describe him. Tall, maybe 50-55, dark hair going gray at the temples, work-worn hands, wearing a gray shirt with a small stain near the collar. The man behind the counter shrugged. "Lady, I see 40 people a day." She left her card. Told him if the man ever came back to please give him her number. He looked at her like she was slightly unwell. She drove home. She put the watch on her nightstand. Now, before we go further, it's important to step back for a moment, because what Gideon was living through is not unusual. It just usually happens invisibly. There are more than 26 million Americans without health insurance. When you lose your job and your insurance disappears with it, you don't just lose your doctor. You lose your ability to manage a chronic illness without financial catastrophe. For the nearly 1.9 million Americans with type 1 diabetes, insulin is not optional. It is not a lifestyle medication. It is the difference between life and death. And in the United States, a single vial of insulin can cost more than $300 without insurance, while the same vial costs less than $30 in Canada, Mexico, and most of Europe. People make terrible calculations to survive. They sell things that should never have to be sold. They skip doses and hope for the best. They do the math of desperation at 2 in the morning on kitchen tables covered in bills they can't pay. Gideon Marsh was not a statistic, but he was living inside one. After selling the watch, he paid for Penny's insulin. He bought groceries. The strategic kind, rice and beans, and a large bag of chicken thighs. The things that stretched farthest. He kept applying for jobs. He had put in 47 applications in 6 weeks. He kept count because it helped him feel like he was doing something, even when nothing came back. He applied at the Port of Galveston, at the Water Authority, at 2 different construction companies, and at a fleet maintenance operation in Texas City. He applied online at 11:30 at night using the public library's Wi-Fi from the parking lot because his home internet had been shut off in the 2nd month. Some applications led to callbacks. Callbacks led to interviews. Interviews led to polite rejection emails, and one that said nothing at all, which was somehow worse. His daughter Penny knew something was wrong. She was 14, not 4. She had overheard conversations she wasn't supposed to. She had noticed the groceries changing. She had noticed her father's face at dinner, the way he moved food around his plate instead of eating it, the way he smiled at her a half-second too late, like the smile was something he had to remember to put on. One evening after dinner, while Gideon was washing dishes, she came and stood next to him at the sink. "Dad, yeah, bug. Are we okay?" He kept his eyes on the dish in his hand. He scrubbed it slower than it needed to be scrubbed. "We're going to be okay," he said. "That's different from are we okay?" He set the dish down and looked at her. She had her arms crossed and her chin up, and that expression that was so much like her grandfather's. It sometimes knocked the breath right out of him. "We've got some tough months ahead," he said, "but we're not going anywhere. This house is ours until July at least." There's food in the cabinet. Your supplies are covered through the end of the month. And after that? He dried his hands on the dish towel. I'm working on after that. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she uncrossed her arms and leaned her head against his shoulder, the way she used to do when she was small, and for a moment he held very still, afraid if he moved the moment would break. You're a good dad, she said quietly. It cracked something open in him, something he'd been keeping sealed for months. He put his arm around her and swallowed hard. You're a good kid, he managed. The best one I've got. I'm the only one you've got. Still the best. She laughed, small and quiet. He felt it against his shoulder. He washed the rest of the dishes alone after she went to bed. And when he was done, he stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the dark street and breathed through the weight of it all. The unpaid utility reminder on the counter. The Medicaid application still pending somewhere in a system that moved at its own pace regardless of his urgency. The watch that was no longer on his wrist. He pressed his thumb against the pale strip of skin on his wrist where the watch had rested for 11 years. He could still feel the ghost of it there, the familiar weight. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. 3 weeks later, Gideon got a call back on a maintenance supervisor position at the Galveston Independent School District. He wore his best shirt to the interview, the blue one he'd had dry cleaned, with the last bit of cash from a plasma donation. He sat across from 2 administrators and answered their questions carefully, precisely the way a man answers questions when he knows this is the one that matters. They said they'd be in touch. He waited. On a Tuesday morning, 6 days later, while Penny was at school and Gideon was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing a job listing for a wastewater treatment position in League City, his phone rang. Galveston ISD. He picked up before the second ring. He got the job. It started in 3 weeks. The salary was $47,200, health benefits included. Coverage would kick in 60 days after his start date. He sat at the kitchen table after he hung up and did not move for a full 2 minutes. Then he put his face in his hands, not from sadness, from the particular exhaustion of a person who has been holding themselves together by sheer will for so long that the moment the pressure eases, the body doesn't know what to do with the relief. He called Penny's school and left a message asking them to tell her to check her phone at lunch. He texted her. Got the job. We're okay. She called him back in 40 seconds. Dad, hey bug. She didn't say anything for a moment. He could hear her breathing, the slight catch in it. Okay, she said finally. Just that, okay. He understood exactly what she meant. That evening he took her to Mosquito Cafe for dinner. A real dinner, not a special occasion dinner, just a Tuesday dinner, the kind they used to have before everything changed. She ordered the shrimp po' boy and ate every bite. He got the burger and ate every bite of that too, and when the check came, he paid it with money from his checking account and did not calculate what it left behind. It was 18 days later that a silver Kia Optima pulled up in front of his house at 4:30 in the afternoon. Gideon was in the front yard. He had borrowed a neighbor's mower and was cutting the grass for the first time in 2 months, working methodically back and forth across the small rectangle of the lawn, the grass throwing green clippings onto his work boots. He saw the car slow down and stop. He saw a woman get out. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled back. She was holding something. He cut the mower engine. The woman walked up his driveway. She stopped about 10 feet away and looked at him with the expression of someone who has rehearsed what they're about to say and is now doubting the rehearsal. I'm sorry to just show up, she said. I asked at the pawn shop on Market Street. The man there remembered you. He said you came back in for something a few weeks ago and he got your name from a receipt. Gideon stood very still, grass clippings on his boots, the smell of cut lawn in the air. Okay, he said. I was there, she said. The morning you sold a watch. I was in the back of the store. Something moved through him. He wasn't sure what to call it. I bought it, she said, after you left. She reached into the bag at her shoulder and took out something small, something gold-toned with a cracked leather band. Gideon's breath left him. She walked forward and held it out. Her hand was steady. Her eyes were not uncertain. It belongs with you, she said. He took it. His fingers knew it immediately, the weight of it, the shape of the crown on the sides, smoothness of the leather. He turned it over. Time is our only gift. Use it well. He couldn't speak for a moment. He looked at the watch and then he looked at her, and he could feel the back of his eyes burning in a way he hadn't allowed in a very long time. "Why?" he said. His voice came out rough. "Because I saw your face when you put it down," she said simply. "And I know what it looks like when someone gives up something that can't be replaced." He swallowed. "I don't know how to." "You don't have to," she said. "I didn't come here for that." He looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time. There was something in her bearing, not wealth, exactly, but the particular calm of someone who knows where she stands in the world and is comfortable there. "What's your name?" he asked. "Josephine Lattimore." "Joe." She paused. "I'm a doctor. I work at a clinic on Broadway." Something shifted in his expression. She saw it. She had learned, over 11 years of practice, to read the particular way a person's face moves when they're calculating whether to say the true thing or the easier thing. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He nodded. "The money from the watch. Was it for medication?" A long pause. The lawnmower ticked softly as its engine cooled. "My daughter," he said. "Insulin." Joe exhaled slowly through her nose. It was the sound of a person who was not surprised but was still, despite everything, affected. "Do you have insurance now?" "I start a job in 2 weeks. Coverage kicks in 60 days after. So you have about 10 weeks with a gap." He looked at her carefully. "Yes." She reached into her bag again and took out a small notepad. She wrote something down and tore the page free and held it out to him. He took it. It was a name and a phone number. "That's the Galveston County Indigent Health Care Program," she said. "If your income has been below a certain threshold, they can cover prescriptions on a sliding scale, sometimes zero cost. A lot of people don't know about it because the county doesn't exactly advertise it." He stared at the paper. "There's also a manufacturer patient assistance program for most insulin brands," she continued. "You apply directly through the company. If you qualify, they can provide the medication free or at nominal cost while you're between insurance coverage periods. I can send you the links if you give me your email." He looked up from the paper. His expression was something she didn't have a word for. Not quite gratitude. More like the look of a person who has been walking in the dark for a long time, and someone has just handed them a flashlight. "My clinic also has a social worker on staff 2 days a week," she said. "Her name is Cynthia. She helps people navigate exactly this kind of situation. Medicaid applications, prescription assistance, utility relief programs. If your application is still pending, she can sometimes help push it through." "I've been waiting 4 months," he said. "I know. It shouldn't take that long. But there are ways to follow up that are more effective than the standard process. Cynthia knows them." He folded the paper carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, right where the watch used to be. "Why are you doing all this?" he said. Not suspiciously, genuinely. Joe considered the question. "When I was in my 2nd year of medical school," she said, "my mother got sick. Chest pain, shortness of breath. She needed a stress test. She didn't have insurance. She didn't qualify for the program she knew about, so she waited. She told herself she'd go when she felt worse. She paused. She had a heart attack 6 months later. She survived, but only because my neighbor happened to be home and called 911 when she found my mother in the parking lot." The yard was very quiet. "The whole time I was in medical school learning how to save people," Joe said, "my own mother almost died of something preventable because nobody told her she qualified for help. Because she didn't know the right doors existed." She looked at him steadily. "I'm telling you, the doors exist." Gideon stood there with grass clippings on his boots and his father's watch in his hand, and his eyes that were absolutely stubbornly dry, because he was Gideon Marsh and he had learned from Raymond Marsh that you don't cry in the driveway. But it was a near thing. "Come inside," he said. "I'll make coffee." She looked briefly surprised. Then she nodded. "Okay." They sat at his kitchen table for an hour and a half. He got out a legal pad and she talked, and he wrote everything down. The county program, the manufacturer assistance applications, the social worker, a food pantry run out of Trinity Episcopal that didn't require proof of membership, an emergency utility assistance fund through Catholic Charities that served anyone regardless of faith. He wrote the names and numbers in his careful, precise handwriting. The handwriting of a man who had spent 20 years logging maintenance reports and knew how important it was to get the details exactly right. Penny came home from school at 4:15 and stopped in the kitchen doorway when she saw a stranger sitting at the table. "This is Jo," Gideon said. "She's a doctor from a clinic on Broadway. She's been helping me figure some things out." Penny looked at Jo, looked at her father, looked at the legal pad covered in her father's handwriting. "Okay," she said carefully. "Do you want some water?" Gideon asked her. "I'm good." She set her backpack down. "Is this about my insulin?" "Among other things," Gideon said. Penny looked at Jo again with those green eyes that didn't miss much. "Are you going to be able to help him?" "I've given him some information that I think will help," Jo said. "But the truth is, your dad has been doing everything right. He just didn't have a complete map." Penny considered this. Then she looked at her father. "You should call Grandpa's watch, Dad." The corner of Gideon's mouth moved. "It's going right back on my wrist the second you leave the room. Good." She went down the hall to her room. A door closed softly. Jo looked at the legal pad. "She's sharp, terrifyingly," Gideon said. Jo gathered her things. At the front door, she paused. "Call the county number first thing tomorrow," she said, "and bring Penny to the clinic sometime next week. I'd like to review her current treatment protocol and talk to her about some newer CGM options that have better coverage pathways under most insurance plans, just to be ready when your benefits kick in." "I will," he said. "Jo." She stopped. "Thank you," he said. "I don't know why you did all this. I probably never will completely, but thank you." She looked at him for a moment. "My mother wore a watch too," she said. "She sold it once, when I was small, and I didn't understand why until I was much older. When I saw you in that shop." She paused. "I just thought someone should give it back." She walked to her car. Gideon stood on the porch and watched her go. When the Kia turned the corner and disappeared, he looked down at the watch in his hand. He fastened it onto his wrist, his fingers working the clasp the way they had done 10,000 times, the familiar click of it locking into place. He turned his wrist over. "Read the engraving one more time, to R. Time is our only gift. Use it well." "Yeah, Dad," he said quietly. "I know. There is something that researchers call the helper's high, a measurable neurological response to acts of genuine generosity that activates the same reward pathways as food or physical comfort. But here is the thing that the science doesn't fully capture. The chain doesn't start where you think it does. It starts earlier. It starts with a woman who engraved a watch in 1968 and gave it to a man she loved, and that act of love traveled through 31 years on his wrist and 11 years on his son's wrist, and a pawn shop on Market Street, and a doctor's bag, and 56 days and a driveway in Galveston, and it landed. Finally, right back where it began. Objects carry the weight of who held them. Gideon's father understood that, Joe's mother understood that, and now Gideon understood something else. Sometimes the things you release in your worst moments don't disappear. Sometimes they move through the world doing work you never imagined, and they come back to you changed in a way that makes them mean more than they did before. Not a wound, a mile marker. 2 years passed. Gideon became the maintenance supervisor at Galveston ISD. He was good at it, methodical, detail-oriented, the kind of supervisor who remembered everyone's name and didn't ask his people to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. He replaced aging HVAC systems in 4 elementary schools, oversaw the repair of a gymnasium roof that had been leaking for 3 years, and in his second year was given a small budget for a department training program. He used part of it to bring in a community health educator from Gulf Coast Community Health to talk to his maintenance staff about insurance navigation and benefit enrollment. He had asked Joe to recommend someone. She sent her social worker, Cynthia. Penny finished freshman year with a 3.8 GPA. She had joined the school's robotics team, which met on Thursday afternoons in a portable classroom behind the gym. She was building something with sensors and small motors that Gideon didn't fully understand, but that she could explain to him in the truck on the way home with a focus and precision that made his chest tight with something that felt like the future arriving ahead of schedule. Her diabetes was well managed. Her new CGM sent real-time glucose readings to an app on Gideon's phone, which meant he could glance at his screen during a staff meeting and know, without asking, that she was okay. It was a small thing and an enormous thing at the same time. Joe became something harder to categorize than a doctor or an acquaintance. She came to Penny's robotics demonstration in the spring. She and Gideon sometimes had coffee on Saturday mornings at the Mosquito Cafe. She told him once, over a cup of coffee that had gone cold because they'd been talking too long, that the watch had been sitting on her nightstand the whole 56 days she'd had it, and every morning she'd look at the engraving and think about the man in the gray shirt and whether he was going to be okay. "Were you?" she asked. He looked at his wrist. The Belova caught the morning light. "I was getting there," he said. "I just needed a map." On a Saturday morning in October, Gideon walked into the pawn shop on Market Street. The same man was behind the counter, same glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked at Gideon and his expression shifted slightly, the way people's faces shift when they recognize someone they've seen in an uncommon context. "You're the watch guy," the man said. "I'm the watch guy," Gideon agreed. He set an envelope on the counter. The man looked at it without touching it. "What's this?" "Information," Gideon said, "for your customers, specifically the ones who come in looking the way I must have looked that morning." The man opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. Printed on it were the names, numbers, and brief descriptions of 6 community resources in Galveston County: prescription assistance, emergency rent relief, the Indigent Healthcare Program, a food pantry, the County Social Services Crisis Line, and Gulf Coast Community Health, where new patients were accepted on a sliding scale fee with no minimum payment required. The man looked at it for a long time. "You want me to give this out," he said. "If you would," Gideon said. "You see people in hard places every day. Most of them don't know these things exist." The man looked up at him. His expression was difficult to read, not unkind, but carefully neutral in the way of someone who had learned not to let too much show. "I'll put it by the register," he finally said. "That's all I'm asking," Gideon said. He walked back out into the October morning. The sun was already warm. A pelican flew over low, heading toward the water. He got into his truck and sat for a moment with the window down, listening to the ordinary sounds of the street. His wrist rested on the doorframe. The Belova caught the light. He started the engine and drove.